of your busy schedule to talk about this. It's something very important and consequential to the neighborhood that we've been working on for several years. So I just want to kind of set out the purpose as well as the flow for the night. I've got a presentation broken into 3 main topics. What I plan to do is go over each of the 3 and in between topics, then kind of open it up for Q&A. And so we want feedback on this. That's the point of this. So in a little bit, I'll get into some of the history of how we got here and why we're doing this. But the point tonight really is this is a public forum. We've spent over 1.5 years publicizing this to the neighborhood, gathering feedback already from many of you in this room have given good, insightful feedback already, which we try to work with the city to incorporate into this, because what we really want is a document that helps improve the outcomes for Tampa Heights. And there's still time to improve it. This is a living document until the second that city council has a second reading on it. So there's always ways to tweak it and improve it and make it serve the neighborhood better. So that's the purpose of tonight. Why are we doing this? Broadly, why? For affordability, safety, and compatibility reasons. I want to be clear what this overlay is not intended to do, because we've had moments where there's been poor communication or misunderstandings that we've needed to clear up. And part of that's been on just trying to communicate exactly what this encompasses. But one is not aimed to shame. The point is not to shame anybody for what they have done or what they may live in. It's to talk about. Sometimes there are real world examples that we learn from, right? It's not anti-density. This neighborhood board has been consistently pro-density. In fact, a lot of times we encourage more of it than a particular developer or homeowner may want to have, because we understand the benefits of density. It's not anti-townhome, that's a part of density. The things that belong in Tampa Heights. It's not anti-modern. There were some divisions here in Tampa Heights as to what type of architecture fit best. But what we've really tried to do is boil down that argument and say, you know what, let's find a common ground that we can agree on. This is not an architecturally based code amendment based at favoring one type or another of architecture. And secondly, it's not applicable to existing homes. So unless somebody does a major renovation, which the city classifies as 51% or more of your assessed value, none of this triggers. And even when you do that, only certain provisions may trigger as they go through a code review. So I want to be clear with that in case anybody thinks that the second it passes, they have to go and change their home or business to comply. To get into a little bit of the history of this effort, in 1995, a National Historic District was created here in Tampa Heights. You're in it right now. In 2000, it was expanded slightly, and a local historic district was created with close to the same boundaries, and there were historic design standards put in place. That governs about 1/3 of the neighborhood. Everything that's built there is very long process to go through that a lot of folks may know about, that goes through the Architectural Review Commission. Immediately following that, because we knew that the rest of the neighborhood did not meet the threshold for the concentration of preserved historic homes, in order to classify for that, the neighborhood leaders at the time said, what else can we do to protect the urban character of the neighborhood that may not be as stringent as a historic district? In 2014, the city promised Tampa Heights that the neighborhood would get a form-based code overlay for the neighborhood, which is what Seminole Heights has, that was passed in 2011. It was also promised to other neighborhoods throughout East Tampa. However, that fell out of favor with the city from a political and just a priority standpoint, as well as staff and resource standpoint. So our board continued to petition them every year thereafter. They said in 2014, it's going to start in 2015, you're going to get it. Every year thereafter, the city kept kicking the can until finally 2019, folks from our land use committee and our board sat down together, started a committee to review some of this, as well as sat down with city planning staff and the planning commission staff to figure out what could be done. Their answer at the time was, again, yeah, you guys deserve some better standards in place, but we don't have the staff and resources to do it for you. So feel free to do it yourself. And that is what we've done. That's why we got here. So between 2019 and 2021, successive groups of the board, there was turnover on the board, but throughout those groups worked on this. And in July 2021, formally submitted it as a privately initiated text amendment to the city. That's where citizens, at least up until this year, have been able to petition the city to change the law when the city doesn't take the lead themselves on. So that's how we got here. Between July and January, there was no movement. The city took that long to review our first draft. And since January, we've been hard at work with the city. And in June, city council voted at a workshop to allow this effort to proceed. So what's our main goal? What's the overall purpose of this? Is to create a more affordable and walkable and transit supportive urban design for Tampa Heights. So all of our standards and incentives in here are geared at creating a more walkable community through these targeted reforms, hopefully creating more benefits like preserving green space and on-street parking, greater use of our alleys, porches, accessory dwelling units, and relaxing commercial parking minimums. So this is just the first step in the process, though. There's a lot that we've talked to, and I personally feel that it would be great to bite off more of the apple than what this is. But as we've learned, we have to take incremental approaches to change, or else we're going to get nowhere. The city just still does not have the staff and resources to do a comprehensive job at what's needed. And every year that we kick the can further, more changes and we lose more of our urban fabric. So we're looking at a measured and logical incremental approach to what we put into place here, but we need to follow that up with an updated neighborhood plan, which the city has promised following their comprehensive plan update that we're working on right now. We have a neighborhood plan from 2003. It's a good guiding document. There's some things that have been accomplished. There's some things that don't apply anymore, and there's some things left unaccomplished. It's 20 years old and it's time for an update to that. And following that, we want to see this incremental overlay reformed and replaced with a comprehensive one that's based upon the recommendations from HART, which is the transit agency transit-oriented design study that they did over the course of last year and concluded this year with some specific recommendations for how to make a more transit-friendly and walkable neighborhood. So topic one, affordability. We're going to throw part of this is to get the logic out there and the reasons why and what we're facing. So one thing people may not realize, despite knowing that we're in a housing crisis, though, is just how hard-pressed renters are. So when you look at the map up to the right, you see the red represents that the percentage of households that spend how much of their gross income on housing. So Florida and Hillsborough County, the Tampa Bay area, that more than 50% of renter-occupied households are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Everybody loves to criticize California, right? It's the punching bag for the country in terms of cost of living. But look which other state is covered in just as much red. Florida. We've got a problem. It's because we have lower wages. We have what people say is a lower cost of living, but they don't realize when you equate that to how much income people make, they're just as hard pressed as they are in some of the most expensive parts of the country. And we've got to do something about that, especially with how much in the last 2 years that rents have gone up. So you've seen rental inflation go up here. These are some key cities in the South, 11.9%. We're leading in this group of cities in terms of rental inflation in the region. And we've got to try some alternative things to do about it. Home prices. Everybody knows that they've gone wildly out of control. Just to show you here, again, another comparison over the past year among these cities listed here, some of the major U.S. cities. The gray bar is the national average. Who's leading the pack? Tampa. Highest housing inflation. This ties to this number, 34.8% year over year. It's come down a little bit since this chart was made a few months ago, but what we can see is Tampa Heights, according to the real estate firm Redfin, 49% year over year. So we're outpacing our region. This neighborhood is outpacing what is among the most highest inflated and rising housing costs in this neighborhood is at the center of it. So second major topic, we talked about affordability. What else do we really need to try to cure and do something about in Tampa Heights? Our pedestrian danger. So I don't think this report's released every year, but from the years at the time, Tampa Bay is always in the top 10 of the most dangerous pedestrian and bike cities in the country. But here in Tampa Heights, we're the oldest neighborhood outside of downtown. We're adjacent to downtown. Most people in this neighborhood should be within walking and biking distance of downtown. So when we do a comparison to other downtown zip codes, you'll see us up here, walk scores ranked 63. Our friends over in St. Peter at 77, Charlotte, Miami, Nashville, Atlanta, all beat us by well over 10 points each. They're just far more walkable downtowns and neighborhoods adjacent to downtown. The Tampa Bay Partnership, here's a snapshot in the middle. They do a regional competitiveness report every year. What do they find is that an average walkability of a region in the United States is 40%, and Tampa Bay is 9.6, ranked 11 out of 11 in their comparisons. These are terrible numbers. We've got to change the way that we design our cities and design our buildings in order to accomplish that. Just to give you a snapshot of where this is going to govern. Here's our existing historic district, and instead, there's our historic district within the official Tampa Heights boundaries as recognized in the comp plan and by the city of Tampa. What we unfortunately this time have to exclude is we're going to exclude Blake High School as well as the Heights CRA, which has its own specialized development standards as part of that master development. And then the historic district, as of now, is to be excluded. Now, there's been some conversations about some of the benefits of this overlay to really benefit the historic district and complement some of its standards as well as gaps that they have. We're trying to see how we can work that in, but the city's pretty consistently said, don't mess with the historic district standards in this effort. It may have to be a separate effort where we can carry some of that over. But that for now is the overlay district area. So big topic number one, ADUs, accessory dwelling units. If anybody's been watching, this has been a major topic nationally as well as locally. The city is looking at allowing accessory dwelling units, which we can call granny flats or garage apartments or the such, in the central planning area, not the whole citywide. South Tampa is too opposed to this for them to even try it, but they're looking at neighborhoods like ours. They're already allowed in Seminole Heights and up near Lowry Park, but nowhere else in the city are they allowed. So what we propose is to allow ADUs by right, which means you don't have to go through any sort of special approval process for them throughout all residential zones, that residential single family and multifamily. That does not add to your density limits, and to increase the height to allow more detached garages. So right now, people have to go through a very burdensome process to try to add this in. And if you live in a multifamily district, like much of that south of Florida, Nebraska, in this neighborhood, then it eats up one of your dwelling units that you're zoned for. So what is an ADU? Like I mentioned, it takes various forms. A lot of us in this neighborhood think of it as detached or a detached above garage. It's pretty typical to the form in this neighborhood. But there's a lot of other ones that you may not even notice because they're integral to the main house structure. You can just put a dividing wall and renovate a place and turn it into an ADU. Right now, a lot of those are counted sort of as two dwelling homes versus an ADU along with a typical home, but it's not just garage apartments. So why? Yes.
How about the person who has homestay? What happens? I think I got a one to operate from you answer. But then maybe other people want to know that if you're homesteading in your home, and you put a unit, what happens to your homestead?
You don't lose your homestead. If you build something new, it will be reassessed by the property appraiser, like when you pull a permit to build something new, they're gonna add that to the value of your taxable property, but you don't lose your homestead. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about affordability, but why ADUs in particular? Why is this a good solution? We've obviously got a lot of townhome development, which is denser than single family, which is adding more units to the neighborhood. We've got a fair amount of new apartments that are set to break ground in the near future here. And that's great. Those are extra living units here in Tampa Heights. However, it's not enough. Look at this mismatch. 28% of the American population are single people who live alone. 90% of our housing stock consists of 2 or more bedrooms. There's a huge mismatch between single people that live alone that have to overpay to rent 2+ bedroom units. So, but why ADUs? You know, to meet this housing shortage, because it's quicker, it's supplemental. For larger apartment developments, they're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to need to assemble land. They're going to need to build that density. A lot of that's concentrated in the CBD peripheral, which is below Palm. And so there's some of those coming online. There's a lot of RM zones that are already zoned that hold townhouses, and those are having townhouses built on them. But where can we supplement more housing stock to meet this great mismatch that's going on? ADUs. Faster and less expensive to build. That's supplemental income for homeowners, which is great. They allow the elderly to age in place. This is pretty popular with folks that say, I want to build an ADU, and either I'll move in there or my caregiver or family member will move in there, and vice versa. Allows them to stay on site, keep their homestead, possibly generate rental income. But here's another misconception I'll clear up. When we posted about this on Instagram, we got a whole lot of hate on Airbnbs and a whole lot of hate on investors. One thing I want to point out is in this real estate boom, only 25% of sales of residential properties went to investors. 75% of them is still owner occupied sales. So we don't have, that's a big chunk, but we don't have, it's not all going to investors. And then the second thing is that for an ADU, to classify as an ADU, it actually has to be owner-occupied house. So by permitting ADUs, it's not going to see an influx of out-of-state or out-of-area money. It's going to benefit that homeowner who lives there, who homesteads it. Otherwise, in order to do that, you'd have to rezone to a multi-family. We talked about them being compatible in Tampa Heights. Here's some pictures from a few different sections of the neighborhood showing some newer and some older ADUs. But you can see particularly the detached garage. This one's actually attached to the structure there. You know, that's a lot split with 2 ADUs in the back. They're prevalent, and that's just, again, what's pretty easy to see from Google. But they're all over the different parts of the neighborhood, not to mention those ADUs within the structure. So with that, I will open up the questions about ADUs.
Okay, you mentioned the ADU, but what happens if the homeowner who got the approval to put in an ADU? Now they sell it to an investor that now has 2 rental units they can invest in, that they can actually rent out. And what happens to the fact that investors are not invested in the neighborhood, they're only invested in their income. So now you have 2 units on the property, and the homeowner that was owner occupied has now sold it. What happens then?
As I understand it, it still has to be an owner occupied main dwelling. I don't know, Matt, do you know more accurately how that passes?
The overall arcing goal of the proposal is to increase rental stock and home stock in there, so yes, it's that. And you could have an investment purchase, right? You could have 2 units there, but the goal is the same thing, is to drive density and to also increase affordability. So, you know, what's stopping your neighbor right now from selling their house in a rental unit? It's
Well,
Same
that
thing,
is
you know,
true,
you do it.
one person, one way instead of two.
There could be 8 people in a 2-bedroom house, you never know that, right? So
That's very,
so the policy is, you know, there's always gonna be an outlier element.
yeah.
Like, there's no way to ever predict that.
That is true, but, now, when you said there's 20% of the investors that are investing in the neighborhood. A lot of the investment is in the land itself, they're buying and then tearing down, creating, units in that area. My advice would be, I worked with the city for 12 years, and I worked with the farm and so over in Civil Heights. And I can't tell you how many people came to my desk because I was in plan review, so I would review the developments and everything else that would come with a housing development. A lot of what we learned about the fact that the parking became a huge issue for them because now the code requires two parking spaces for every unit. You've added a unit, now you have 4 parking spaces on the property. Form-based zoning in similar plans. There was a development allowance for commercial, heavy commercial along the corridor, which is the last Florida Avenue. But Florida Avenue, and then the density decreases a little bit. Well, as those areas got developed, and then the city gave a lot of parking waivers to a lot of those restaurants, they're now parking into the neighborhoods. So when I was in the city, the residents were screaming about parking because of those flowing through their neighborhoods. Drive through Central Heights in the city, no parking, residential parking, by code, whatever. And then the other thing is that the city's going to be involved. I would recommend that you make sure that they have a commitment into this. Develop the infrastructure for all of the stormwater, for the water supply, for the parking, for the transportation. Walkable is nice, and bus service is nice, biking is nice. But when you have people that are my age, we ain't gonna do it. That's going to be the issue for older people. If you're going to have somebody that's in this situation where they're an older person. When I say infrastructure, Central Heights has had form-based zoning for probably about 10 or more years now. They're just now getting new stores down Central Avenue. Just now, that's what 12 years or so later. Their commitment was not there, and the neighborhoods there is screaming about the city commitment. The last thing I want to say about the form-based zoning is that it is complex. If I did not have a book to tell me what was allowed on what property, and I would have to use a legend to tell me this is allowed here except for there, and if you do this and you can't do that, I would answer this question. A lot of the residents and citizens will never understand the scope of the form-based zoning, so they will have to have some professional to help them go with it. I would strongly recommend if you do this, you need to make sure that the city has a very, very strong commitment in all of those issues, because they will come back to you by the form-based zoning.
Yeah, understood. So there's a lot to unpack there. I don't mind responding to that or open it up if you wanted to respond to that. Okay. So got it. Separate question. All right, I'll come back to Ricky. So a lot to unpack there. I've heard similar criticisms about Central Heights and the way that they did their form-based code being categorized like you mentioned with that. So again, this is not a form-based code. This is very straightforward zoning provisions about urban design and parking and ADUs and straight like that is not form-based. Like Central Heights is. So the form-based code, it prescribes, certain sets of ways that you can form your block, and the way that Seminole Heights breaks down, and then again, you can butt in and clarify further than no, I'm just saying it, is they break it down into even tighter use types as well within that. So you have to go cross-reference a whole lot. I've dug through it as well, and it's far too complex. I think even everybody in the city seems to acknowledge that so far. Yeah.
The other thing is that you've been in the neighborhood one time, and I was actually raised in the city throughout the 50s and the 60s and 70s, and still have property here. in the seventies and the eighties, before the current zoning code changed in 1986, we were allowed to put duplexes wherever we wanted to. And they did, it tore down some historic houses, so they don't duplexes, but you rent out their duplexes.
That's
They didn't tore down and put in duplexes. Well, that's what caused the neighborhoods to fail.
Jefferson.
Because you have rentals
I don't know about that.
were not made. And there's no way you're gonna guarantee that someone that's going to build an ADU or whatever and rents out both properties, both units on those properties, that they're gonna maintain the property, but they don't live here outside of the month. They're not gonna worry about the details of cleanliness and, landscaping and things like that. They're not gonna worry about that as much. So that's what happens to Tampa Heights, is that a lot of these duplexes that came in forced a lot of the other residents out. And that changed in 1986 when they actually went to residential, single family, and detached, multi-family, a duplex, whatever. In 1986, there was a definite code that allowed and distinctively told them what the use of that property should be. And that's where Tampa Heights failed. That's why we're now starting to come back, but for a long time, nobody wanted to do here.
I mean, yeah, and I understand that, and for the lot, I mean, I think you and I are just gonna have to agree to disagree on that viewpoint. I mean, you've lived here for longer than I have, obviously, and seen this neighborhood through different generations. I personally think that we are at a transition point, and we got to look forward to the next generation and the next set of issues that are here. We have that set of issues over the last few decades. We have a new set of issues coming in. I think we can make the argument that there's a lot of single family home rentals that aren't well cared for in the neighborhood as well. I don't know that density has a whole lot to do with it. I think it's just poor landlords.
That's just it's not there.
Sure, Ricky,
The city was passed the same ADU allowances, neighborhood, multiple neighborhood.
so that's what they're looking at. Last night, there was a public information meeting in the city looking at just the central planning area. So they did 5 or 6 neighborhoods that the comp plan defines in the central planning area. I think it's, Ybor Heights, Tampa Heights, West Tampa, some of the core area, maybe North Hyde Park. But the reason that this is in here, separate from what the city's ever doing, I mean, it really does overlap and mirror it, is that we don't know the city's success at that's going to happen or happen on the same timeline. So there's certain neighborhoods that embraced it as a whole. And again, not everybody does. The reality is not everybody's going to agree every single thing here. It's getting to the point where we've got, a sizable proportion of the neighborhood that agrees on this, and we have a plan moving forward. But that's why this is in here separate from the city.
The city's effort defines accessory dwelling separately, precisely. Or to look,
What's that?
the city's effort redefines accessory dwelling specifically.
We're not redefining it.
I know,
Yeah, this is following whatever the city calls an ADU. Current.
and is that the intent?
The intent with this is to allow them. And it points to city code in terms of just this is an accessory dwelling unit. Then the default to whatever, however the city defines it.
I was saying that they're changing how they're defining, correct, because it needs to be,
Yes,
but that's what we're pointing to.
yes. That's what we're pointing to. We are not fully defining what an ADU is in this neighborhood specifically. This falls upon the city's definition.
Currently.
Man, because there's so many of them built, really hard to get.
What you're proposing
My
here
God.
is entitlement to every property in this single family property. And there again, that's why.
And Daniel's getting
a strong commitment.
ready built.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
It's just, you've got to have strong commitment for the city. You don't have to. you'll
Doesn't-
have-
Yeah, particularly from code enforcement and other.
And code enforcement is lacking already.
Because it's currently policy only, I think you had slide out previously, it's only owner occupant you, it's not meant, the current ADUs are not meant to be third party use.
That's correct.
So I guess that's what, I think you're talking about supply of housing.
They can be rented, ADUs can be rented. These aren't family only.
I think the current city code says that it needs to be internally utilized, to play it on around.
For the ADU itself.
For the
That's
ADU
the,
itself.
that's the current
Yeah.
code we're pointing to.
That, right, but they're trying to reform that. Got it. So,
Yes.
City required to go back and verify the family use, year after year.
Correct. And they're not supposed to have like a cooking appliance for that.
Oh, well, you can get special use. As long as you have special use, the city gets.
so overall, I think there may be some misunderstanding between what we're pointing at, which is current, and what we've been in conversation with the city with, which is more their intent mirroring what they're passing. And so maybe if, again, this stays in here and we push forward with it, is to clarify that they do not have to be owner occupied ADUs or family dwelling ADUs.
Or if the citywide comes forward, and without resistance.
Yeah.
They can just piggyback on it.
Well, that's what we're trying to do now. That's why we haven't gotten super specific about redefining an ADU in here, because we're doing some parallel to the city. But the reason we're keeping it in here and not just crossing it out is, I don't know that we have faith that it's gonna pass fully in the city. They might be able to redefine an ADU, but are they gonna actually extend it by right to a greater area? Is the question. Okay, well, no, but
And that opens up to like discussion too, like.
Yeah.
Again, like if this document doesn't move or change. Define or redefine.
I mean, if we decide, you know what, we need to strike it from this and then put our efforts into the citywide effort, knowing that, again, if that fails, we get nothing, then that's the decision. The board kind of has to, I guess, again, the board gonna take this into consideration, talk about it, and then make alterations, again, with the city based on it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was that if the idea is not add an additional legal unit, we're basically saying everyone gets that has will be allowed an additional bonus density of one more unit. And you can not, you don't have to adhere to primary structure setback. And then you also can meet, so you can be building 35-foot tall structures 3 feet from the property line, in all the way back on the alley. So it's like, it's very, I mean, the code as it's currently presented allows a lot. And I don't know, if, at least my current understanding that an ADU would be, it's not going to be utilized that way. If I had one, I'm going to rent it out, put it as an Airbnb, it's illegal, but you almost like, who's going to enforce it? Like, there's a lot of other things that are going to be higher priority. So it just,
Long-term, I think in California, people put ADUs all over California before they work, right? And then you talk about like this great stat that all of the housing is housing, I think that it would be really good, even if the city stuff can go forward, that there is that provision of it can, even if it's owner occupied structure, the ADU can be rented out on whatever basis. But I do think, like, I know we're mentioning the garages and stuff, so like making sure if we all hope we're on Francis, like there's some structures bringing back like huge walls onto the alley that at least for where we live, like it is a lot harder to back out of our house now, and making sure that there is the ability, like we're not all of a sudden getting garages onto alleys with like two sets of people parking in it, et cetera.
well, I think it's also saying though, if you make it a legal dwelling unit, there's also a requirement for parking.
Yeah,
And
like,
even
how
if you make it a separate dwelling, there's no incremental parking. So now if we know that there's gonna be someone inhabiting it, it's gonna add most likely 1 or 2% cars. At least make them add that into their lot versus allowing that to be off free parking, which is, I think that's part of the Tampa Heights problem. Tampa Heights doesn't have a lot of alleys, a lot. They have a ribbon drive where one person parks on the ribbon, one person parks on the street. So if someone wants to take this benefit,
Great.
or they can find a way to park a 2 additional cars, or whatever it is.
Well, that's me very further into the middle.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna like what you're gonna hear later.
Well, but that, yes, that has to do with putting your, on entrance. So every time you put a driveway, you're removing street parking, right? The basically plan that we're getting is street parking, we don't have street parking, we have street parking. So every time you put a 2-car driveway in front of the house, you just remove the parking spaces every time. So later up in the rest of the amendment also says if it's alley access, which is the garage access in the rear, which preserves not only the parking space in front of it, but across the street too. So if I have a driveway there, I can't back up, right? Like you're blocking the street. So the rest of it, if you look at it from a comprehensive standpoint, is reducing curb cuts, which is increasing parking on the street. And that also is putting your utilization of your alley. So as a bigger overall plan, let's say there is a ADU on the back, you now opened up 1 to 2 more parking spaces because you're not using it in curb cuts to drive.
Yeah, but for an existing structure that's adding, if you do a first point.
It's not in curb.
So like, yeah, you have to add the parking, if you're gonna add another dwelling unit, you need to add a parking spot, it's not that just puts it into the alley or into the street, like. That's already.
But you know,
You're guys don't work, but that's the full parking for, it's obviously not furniture, it's like. I do think if you're adding a unit, you should add at least 1 parking spot.
Okay, noted.
To add to that, if you're in the middle of the block, and you're gonna do alley parking, if you have an open alley.
Mhm.
The transportation code requires you to pay that out up to your residence in the lot. Are you sure? Because that's one of the things that we always have to have paid to that property.
Yeah, they're not enforcing that anymore, and they're looking to reform their whole street of alleys in order to get them utilized again. Yes, Dave.
I'm kind of concerned with what Frank said in terms of not making it owner occupied, having lived here for many years. That it just seems like that should be something that we're striving for. By increasing the rental units, it's going to change the whole caliber of residential neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised, and I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but how many rentals we already have in the neighborhood. And from my, I'm only gonna speak for myself. I mean, my personal belief about Tampa is that we all have to come to grips that this city is gonna change whether we like it or not. I mean, 100,000 people just moved to Hillsborough County in the last 4 years. And we've changed nothing about how we accommodate those people, how we move them around. We keep talking about Tampa being the next great American city, but I frankly don't think we really act like it or plan for that or how to deal with those people. The nature of the city is going to change whether we like it or not.
Yeah, but I'm also
And
concerned.
we've got to accommodate.
Yeah, but I'm also concerned that you're saying that things are going one way. Well, things tend to get sicklier.
Sure.
And just because things are going up, it doesn't mean that in 20, 30 years, things can go back down. And,
Yeah, that's about.
I mean, you may not have been living here.
You were in the neighborhood long.
I mean, I was living here, my husband was living here since he was born. This area was dangerous. I mean,
you're right, it's gone, it swings from one place to another, but there's a period when it wasn't. You know?
yeah, I know, before, right now.
So we can't just focus on the time when it was there. Before that, when this was the first problem with the city of Tampa, this was a high-end neighborhood, and it was that way for a long time. And then there are things that changed, and then it changed, and then now we're doing other things, it's changed back. People that look like we can't even afford to live in Tampa Heights anymore. People that have houses that when I moved in here, it was a mixed community. Every day it becomes less diverse. So I'm
not trying to change it to be any that way. My concern is the difference between a unit that's totally rental and a unit that's where people live in. There just seems to be a lot more pride from somebody that owns the unit.
But the only way to increase, to pay more affordable is increase density, it's the only way. to do it.
Yeah, I don't mind having the density increased. I just feel like you're gonna add ALUs, you should have at least a homestead in there.
Well, I sorry.
That's all I'm trying to say.
So the Mary and then Josh, maybe you want to go there as well? No, you go. I saw your hand. Go.
and along with the men's and breakfast. This neighborhood was nice when it was single family. And then it was major disinvestment in the industry. It's still on the farming, the going railroads, it's like another city. How a lot of us have fought and are still fighting to keep rental units and keep it single family. If we want to put a unit on and it's a nice mix, it was a lot different. The apartment buildings, the floor prices, but people didn't have 2 and 3 cars per. And that we, if we could keep what we have. We don't have the city enforce the ability to enforce their codes. To keep them able to stay in that workforce.
Yeah.
And, so I'm bringing the faith, and yes, we have lost a lot of diversity. And like the shame, a lot of the in this character. But, increasing the density of the population on the overlap. To say what you got, take Central Avenue. There's no on-street parking in Central Avenue, and I still live it. It makes it a safe street.
Why don't we jump in, well, I'm sorry, I have 2 more comments on this, noted, small,
North of.
Josh. If we can keep it to ADUs, if we're gonna get, we'll
So,
pass into part.
so with the ADU, I think we're too focused on these are gonna all be rentals, because some of us have small ass houses. And like, this is gonna allow people to grow and keep their properties, and they're not gonna be moving out of the neighborhood. Cause that's where you're gonna get a lot of rentals, cause like right now, our house is too small. We're looking for a bigger house. So if we can have an ADU, we get that extra space, and we're not gonna rent the house out, and we'll stay on our property. So I believe a lot of people will utilize the space that way too. Not everyone's gonna do a rental house. People are working from home more often, they're having children, and like that office space that they have may become a nursery, and then they have no office space anymore. So the ADUs are gonna be a good opportunity for a lot of homeowners around the neighborhood that have small houses.
And maybe you don't knock down a historic house,
Right.
and to put a big house in, you, I think, keep it, because you can add a square footage on it.
Why are we saying ADU though? Why not just say we want to add a multi-family? Why want to add an additional well? Like, if we're limiting it to only one occupants, and we know that's not going to be the case. Again, I feel like the ADUs by nature have far less stringent code requirements around setback, parking, everything, height, everything. So why are we going to let them utilize it for that use, but not have them do all the requirements around?
Such as rezoning everything to RM, and then it has to meet all the RM standards, is what you're saying, or?
I guess I'm saying, okay, let's back in. Is the goal is we want to have more rentable units, or if the goal is we want to have people be able to have their multiple generations living on the same property?
All of the above. It's, the goal is, and I think the goal of the city and the goal with a lot of other cities that are around the nation is to create more small dwelling units as either, again, rental, multi-generational housing, all that.
An ADU would theoretically by code because it's generations for your family versus where it's going to be used as short-term rental generations, family offices, not all of them, say it will be used. If there's going to be, I don't want to put numbers on, but it'll have a variety of uses. Maybe that's not what the code would say, but that's what it'll be utilized for. So if theoretically a primary structure could still be used as an office, it could still be used as a legal rental, but these are not going to have addresses. They're not going to have, if I live there as a rental, I'm not going to be able to get my mail sent there.
It's not separate metered, it's not.
Correct.
Yeah,
You know, if all these things that we're worried about with the parking and the people already have concerns when setbacks get reduced, that's only going to get worse if someone has a pool and all of a sudden I build a 35-foot tall accessory dwelling unit in my backyard blocking the pool, like versus, you know, if you're going to build that, you need to be 7 feet away from the side, you need to be 15 feet off the back. So it seems like you're overly reducing the zoning requirements for everyone and giving them the potential additional density. So I guess it seems like it would be either or. And that's the part that I guess, where if you don't allow it, or you say, we'll give the, everyone the RM zoning, and then you can have DC the primary structure setback.
Then you can't build it, it's not possible.
Why is it not possible?
You can't build a 15-foot setback. If we built an ADU in our place, and it would not have been possible 15-foot setback from the alleyway, because then it's right on top of your house. Right? That's the way houses are built. Yeah, and that,
setbacks.
yeah, yeah,
Correct. You can get a variance, I'm certain if you have site limitations, if you're saying, I'm gonna preserve my house to do this, but then there's gonna be other people who still allow it, where someone might have a big house, and like, oh, I wanna get it around the room, I'm gonna build whatever I'm gonna build, and build it 3 feet off your lot.
I guess the goal is, we want to, I mean, the whole point of this conversation is, do we want to encourage it?
That's right. I mean, it's hard, it's the microcosm of the national conversation going on.
The current accessory dwelling units by nature are intended to be very small footprint type buildings. Say if you put out a garage, I think there's some rule that they can't exceed more than 15% of your
Lot size.
So
And
that-
right now, they can't exceed 15 feet tall.
So anything over 450 feet for something that's very small is 950.
950 is the max. 15% of your lot up into.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. All right.
Okay.
But, you know, to this point, that if you're going to garage or one and put a setback, just so you have the proper turning radius, you are to one of the garage from the house. So you need to have that. Currently, this attached structure, if you go to 0.25 feet, it's 35 for the instrument. It's still 22.5 feet,
Mhm.
but the thing is that you'll see zoning allow 35 foot after that property.
3 feet of that.
Like, I just think imagine, so we already were building garage house, like if someone put an ADU right next to our garage. Like,
That's transportation.
I know, but we're saying we're in first, I guess that the point is like. We should just be careful that it's like, we enable homeowners to do all of this without like decreasing usability for the neighborhood, I would say, right? So like, I can still properly reverse out of my garage, there's not additional cars ending up on the street, if you can put the parking spot with your ADU, you're gonna rent it, et cetera. I guess that would be.
Okay, good point. I mean, in the end, you know, part of this, at its core is we're gonna remain a mostly single-family home neighborhood. You know, and that's just going to densify over time through market forces, or do we want to kind of steer that somehow and welcome density and say, again, we are the closest neighborhood into downtown Tampa. We want to develop with walkability in mind, and we need the density to support that. So, are we ready to move on from EDU? I think we've collected the comments. No, not ready to move on.
I was just saying, you're all
Okay.
and
Yes.
I'm all over on West Branches. And
Yeah.
I think we're multi-family,
Mhm.
and so right now you can put up a duplex, right? I looked at a lot of resistance in the city as far as I know, if they're going all over the place, so. To me, it kind of feels like density has to be added, if you can do it. And so it's like, yeah, we have the choice, is what the market do, which is gonna duplex, because that makes the most money, right? Or maybe, all right, maybe like a third of that density three, to me, seem like less of an impact. Because these duplexes are 35 feet tall, right? They're right next to yeah, and so, whereas maybe it's less likely to be, have as much of an impact from my perspective. But
Yeah.
kind of from what I,
But you can have a duplex and the.
nah, I don't think you can fit that in there.
With this,
Saying, that's what it's moving.
so far as written is to apply to that. So if the duplex leaves room on the lot and it qualifies within a space of the lot, they could.
But if you put maybe on the same line.
Yeah.
That's what my, another one of those things, but because it's still 3,000 square feet each.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Again, if there's the room to do it, we're talking about, again, at its core, do we want to find a way to allow more density?
So I just want to add,
Yes.
my concern is that poor people can't live in their neighborhood. That's my concern. When I was here, there were quite a number of poor and African American, Black, and Hispanic that owned homes. Now it's gotten to the point where we are losing our diversity. And I know for a fact that if I'm a full person, and I have a home that is sending out to me from my parents. And I'm able to put another unit in there that I could rent, so that I can have some income to fix my house, so that I don't have to sell it when the first person comes in after the check. Then I will have an opportunity to stay where I am, and my neighborhood is going to be that. That's important to me. I want to see other people that look like me stay in my community. To me, this is a means of doing that. So that's my makers.
Okay. Thanks. Is there anybody online still? No.
Well, they're online, but. no
Oh, they're online.
questions.
Okay, no questions. Okay.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is if you're gonna allow rental units to stay apart. Again. I think
Okay,
that's-
yeah, I think some of the core comments come out of here, is, aside from outright opposition, which is a valid point, and what we talked about is parking, height, setback.
Right.
And whether we need to incorporate some of what the city is pushing forward in terms of rental versus family occupied. So we'll look at all that. We'll look at occupancy type, parking, setback height.
What's more affordable? Owner occupied. I'm not saying no the answer, just saying it would be nice to be happy.
Yeah.
From that drive.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, we're gonna move on to the next mechanism, which is walkability through design. And a lot of this does have to do with parking, garage location, driveway location, based on a few comments. I can tell a couple in this crowd, already gonna take some issue. We've already kind of veered into that. If you allow me to go through some of this, go through some of the reasoning why, then we'll open it back up to the discussion before, and we'll try to again pull out some of that commentary towards actionable items where we can edit this document. So walkability and community building, what code mechanisms are in place in the current draft? That new development should use the existing alleys if navigable. If not navigable or the alley doesn't exist, property owners can improve them to city standards, which is current policy, or orient the driveway garage to the fronting street. Again, sort of reiterating current policy. The should is not a must, but the curb cut on the street frontage can only be 10 foot plus the flares unless the lot's wider than 70 feet. The standard width for a lot of Tampa Heights homes is 50 to 60 feet wide. So again, there's some larger lots and there's some combined lots that are out there that are larger than 70 feet, but 10 feet allows you a single lane driveway if you're approaching from the front. If front facing, garages must be situated on the back 50% of the property. So that means no garages on the front facade. Garage is permitted by right to be accessory structures detached from the main structure. Right now, that's not allowed. So if you want to, outside of the historic district, build a detached garage as your accessory structure, you have to get a design exception to do so. This removes that. So if you want to have a separate garage off your alley or from the front approach, you have to have a design exception, or it has to be integral to the physical house itself right now. On-street parking immediately in front of your property can count towards your total off-street requirements. So that's again, when we're talking about parking, and I'm going to take a particularly different viewpoint than has been expressed. I think some on our board shared that viewpoint, was that street parking is not a bad thing. It has its benefits as well. And this ties directly into where we park our cars and what we do with them, because Matt already kind of mentioned this in our last discussion, but the wider driveways we have and the more curbside we eat up, the more on-street parking we lose. That ties into limiting driveway width by preserving on-street parking so that you can use that spot as the visitor spot, as your ADU spot potentially. Counts on-street parking towards your parking count. So an orientation, the front doors of all new principal structures shall be oriented toward the front yard of the zoning lot or facing the nearest side street, corner lot. that in plain language is front door has to be on the front of your house. And then front porch can approach 10 feet into the setback. That is an incentive to build more porches. Right now, the city actually passed something a couple of years ago that allows it to approach 8 feet. So standard setbacks across most of our neighborhood are 25-foot setbacks from the property line. That's pretty far for a traditional neighborhood. You're going to see some pictures about what traditional setbacks are. You know, a lot of folks that are building now are going and seeking design exceptions, variances, other sorts of things in order to bring their front setback up just to what the historic build line is of some of the historic houses around them, which are sometimes, you know, as little as 5, generally more, probably around 10 to 15 feet. So the 10-foot encroachment allows you to bring your house up to a 15-foot setback for the porch. That porch could be multi-story. No fence shall exceed the standards in the fence code between the front property line and the front facade of the structure. And what we've seen happen a couple of times in the layman's term, this points to the standard city fence code. And what the fence code allows is 3-foot opaque, which means you can't see through a fence, or a 4-foot visible fence, like a picket fence in your front yard. Everywhere else can be a 6-foot fence on your side in your yard. However, we've seen a couple newer projects that have come in and proposed, some unsuccessfully, some successfully, put 6-foot blank block or opaque fence wall in the front yard, but just inside the standard setback to get around this rule. So this closes the loophole in city code. The purpose for not having tall fences is it creates community. If anybody's ever been to South America, Central America, and you see how people build tall walls in front of their whole property, it's a compound. It does not create a safe walking environment. It does not create a sense of community, the eyes on the street condition for, you know, helping your neighbors see what's going on from a public safety standpoint. That's why the city doesn't already allow it. But because there's a loophole, some people have created these front courtyards that really close them off on that sense of community that just isn't compatible with the Tampa Heights historic character. So that's the purpose of an explanation of that piece. So what does all that do? By regulating how and where our cars can be parked, how they can access our site, how we use our street parking for, how we encourage front porches, all of this. These are all key items that come from groups like American Planning Association, the Institute of Architects, Congress for New Urbanism, countless studies that point to what is good walkability. Well, this quote up here comes from the Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Well, a walkable community is healthier. What are some of the key things about that? A grid street network, which we have. Commercial destinations close to home, trying to get infrastructure for pedestrians. Front porches and small building setback allow people from inside the building to watch the streets. And then parks nearby, in general green space. Part of what also limiting the driveway width when approaching from the front that preserves the front yard green space. Allows more trees to be planted that are shade over the sidewalk, which is necessary in order to create a walkable environment. Nobody wants to be walking down stretches like you might have to on Dale Mabry without an ounce of shade in the Florida heat for a good 6 months in the year. From the Federal Highway Administration's guide on bicycle and transportation, fewer driveways mean more affordable, smaller home sites and more space for on-street parking. Alleys eliminate residential driveways and the need for backing up into the street, which would otherwise occur and is inherently unsafe. The Highway Administration said alleys are good because they make it safer that people aren't backing up out of driveways, cross sidewalks into the street. How many times have we seen in suburban residences? There was a famous case a couple of years ago, some guy running over his own daughter backing out of the driveway. People are crossing those sidewalks. We want a walkable, friendly community that's safe to walk down the street without worrying about backing up cars. People can back up into the alley and come out at one combined point onto the street. Federal Highway Administration, which governs highways, cars, says that's safe. Neo-traditional design encourages on-street parking by counting spaces for the maximum parking space requirement. Again, if you have a neo-traditional design neighborhood, this is a traditional design neighborhood, neo-traditional is recreating that. They count it. The U.S. Department of Transportation recommends traffic calming through on-street parking. That serves as a buffer between pedestrians and vehicles for safer sidewalks. These are federal guidelines. These are federal value statements. This is not me or the Tampa Heights Civic Association pulling it out of thin air. So let's talk about what that looks like. In that code mechanism, what are you seeing? You're seeing lots of paved space by extra wide driveways. Here you're seeing a lot of green space there. You're seeing more vehicles that are backing out onto when the majority of these sites have access to alleys. And if they don't have access to an alley, let's control better how they access that site. That's going to force different design decisions. It's going to force people to make some different decisions. That's going to force, maybe some townhomes to become condos or apartments instead without losing their density. But it's going to create a walkable, more safe, friendly environment that people want to be in. This one on the right is an example of not having the front door on the facade of the structure. Here's some proposed incompatible examples. The top one here is one that the Civic Association tried to work with the developer and architect on. And that was defeated at city council. It's being built with one less unit. So if you kind of took that away, it's essentially the same. But this is on Ola Avenue that's planned to become a bike lane. It's adding additional double wide driveways right across a bikeway that's supposed to go from the Riverwalk all the way from the Tampa Heights, the funded FDOT project to encourage a more bike-friendly community. When this has access to the alley, one of the units is using the alley, but a different design decision orienting that by having this in place creates the design decision where they have to utilize the alley for another one of those units, thereby using an existing curb cut onto a bike lane sidewalk. It's fewer car and pedestrian bike interactions. And the more of these we have, the more inherently unsafe it becomes. Here's another planned development on West Francis. These are actually on the same street. And this one actually has an L-shaped alley, one that goes around the back, one that goes around the side. The Civic Association objected to the design exception here, which was surrounding having a courtyard and not a front door for each unit facing the front, which allowed them to put two double wide garages on the front end facing Francis. And no vehicle access from this side alley. There's some units that access from the back. But what this does is that entire 80-foot wide lot has zero on-street parking. It's not built yet, but it's already been permitted, I believe. It's at least been granted the exception to design it this way. Zero, we just lost 80 feet of on-street parking from that design. Again, a different design decision based on the guidelines would result in a different outcome. Preservation of on-street parking. Here's some examples. Here's some other examples of both modern and historic townhomes and single-family houses that have been built to the standards that we're proposing. You can still have a curb cut, but it's less wide because you're in the on-street parking there. Again, here's an example from the historic district of a fourplex apartment complex. The main front door there completely preserves their on-street parking because they utilize the alley for all of those units. The same with those. I think that's a stack. That's a side-by-side duplex, all using their existing alley for vehicle purposes. All right. That takes us through the examples there. So let's open up the discussion. I'll go back to here, code mechanisms.
How does
Great questions.
the frontal orientation scale up to apartments?
How's that
Like
scale up
mobile
to apartments?
Yeah.
Well,
or NoHo, or Hyde Park, where there's apartment across the porches, but the
Sure.
doors don't face the street, they face the porch.
Yeah. I mean, technically, under this, that is not allowed. This has been a question that's come up before, is if something is on the front of the building, but it's side facing door and not necessarily oriented towards the street, under this, that would require a design exception.
And mobile park style too.
Technically, but I think a lot of those are gonna have to go through a PD anyways.
Well, this is RM 24.
Yeah.
Development,
Yeah,
which is the south half of South Third.
so in your opinion, should this be struck or
No,
amended
I'm
in a
just-
certain way? Yeah.
Wanting to point, and wanting to ask the question about how does, like what I said, how does this scale beyond single families or single family detached, some or
Yeah.
attached?
Yeah.
To developments where there may not be single entries or
Mhm. No, that's a good point. You know, I think in terms of what we discussed at the board level, I don't really have an answer for that. Probably needs to be considered how it's applied, and maybe the exclusion needs to be carved out for multifamily or a certain unit count or something.
maybe, I'm just, that's a lot of thinking.
Yeah. Yes.
I wonder if, maybe this is already been considered, but could you integrate, this encouragement for more alleyway access into the ADU plan tenant, as they mentioned, where like, if you want to build an ADU, then you have to build some sort of, the parking that comes along with ADU has to attach to the alleyway, if that's part of the requirement. So that now you're starting to encourage people to move back to the alleyway, because there's no real incentive, right, in here to push people to go to the alleyway, so maybe you need to kind of put some barriers in there. I let that be.
Well, I think the carrot in here is that this is restrictive. If you go to the street, you can only put one single with driveway versus on the back of the alley, you can go as wide as you want on the driveway. So you can fit all the parking spaces you want. So that's sort of the carrot versus the stick. It's really, you know, it's forcing a design decision.
So a lot of the samples that we show, like, there's a lot of concrete from attached structures, because attached structures require 3 parking spots, and single family homes require 2 parking spots, but if we wanted it for density, can we just have attached structures requiring 2 parking spots, and then you can just have that single drive, and it's an inconsistency in city code, if we're in favor of code density, we want more green space, we don't like the amount of concrete that's coming with these attached structures, like, just say, we'll just go to the single family allotment.
The single parking immediately in front of property is not required. So that would give you your, so if you're 3.
Yes.
Or you're on. So you're on 3, it counts 1.
But sorry, is that only because of bedroom count or any townhome requires 3 spaces?
Kind of the largest count is the third, but like our, the 2 like we really requires 6 parking spots. We would have that exception of 4. So that's why I say if you can get, like, we're encouraging density, like, we have to, those would be, 2 per unit, that single family home.
I think 3 or more as a visitor parking requirement. So how does it work though? Like, I'm standing on street parking.
Yeah.
But there's gotta be on a street like Ross, 32-foot wide street or 30-something foot easy. But on a street like Francis, 24 feet wide, if someone parks on one side of the street, someone can't park on the other side. So whose right is it to, if I built my townhome or my single family home, with these 2 spots in front of my house and mine, someone builds across the street, they can't also have those. So someone, how does that work? If everyone can't use on-street parking to count towards their required parking.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a possibility. I mean, I think, you know, what we're gonna see is, you know, not a great amount of that really being utilized. But we could certainly contemplate a restriction on the number of spaces you can count towards that. Cap it at 1. per property.
I mean, you could, that, I mean, Tampa Heights is, I don't know the percentage, but a very significant percentage of the houses have the ability to utilize an alley that was not utilized for decades.
Yeah.
So with a lot of these, it's all generally for new development.
Yeah.
If there should be more incentive to encourage the utilization of that for both existing as well as the redevelopment, you kind of getting to the, maybe it's someone that had a front facing driveway or whatever it is. Hey, if I put my parking in the rear and get rid of my curb cut, now I get the ability to do something here or whatever that is. Those would be,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, that's
That's a really interesting concept, if they care, if you care, heard that.
a lot of people have the luxury of, if you're talking a single family home, 1,400 square foot bungalow, you know, most of the people have their 10-foot curb cut. They park one car on the curb cut, one car on the street, they have 50 by 50 rear yard that's completely unutilized.
right. I think some of that though is the convenience factor. For now, it's them versus going and taking a section out of their fence and putting down some gravel and marking off on the alley instead. Part of that comes from, you know, if we, again, put some more cars on the street and they have the ability as an existing resident to do that, then that may force them to utilize their alley more. But I like the incentive idea. I mean, to even reduce those driveways to get it on there. I mean, maybe there's a way to, I mean, short of, you know, given the money to do so, you know, maybe there's other ways of
If
doing
you
it.
want to add an additional unit, pull your parking to the rear.
Density,
Now,
density.
you're not negatively impacting your neighbors by throwing more cars in the front and visibility wise. They have that token, if you will. You make that investment in the dwelling unit and moving the parking in the rear, and now you have this option to utilize it. And everyone theoretically has that. I mean, yes, not everyone could spend $80,000 to $100,000 building a unit, but if they do spend that another $5,000 or $6,000 to pull the parking to the rear, it's certainly in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
For a long time, the city did require, at least I was in the historic district part of it, and studying the maps of the land south of Columbus, north Columbus, figured the patterns.
Mhm.
But, and even they would require, the city would require, the historic district to come off the alley, and that's terrific. And the incentive could be to getting that from the city, where the alleys exist, to get people to use it. Because I'm gonna say probably what certain communities understand is, appreciate. There are new houses that are in the historic district that have parking access from the garage, from the alley and the street block. That's just crazy. So the city has the mechanisms to do a lot of this right now. And even when they're putting in driveways, say on Central, it doesn't have, North Point, that doesn't have an alley. They're putting in these humongous things when people who want to do the old historic style, the same character, are down in the range of spot. But also when you put in the middle ones, you want to have strike lines a little bit on the side. You can't park there. But if you do that from the city, to do the office and then also get to improve them as an example, and then get the city to not have people.
Yeah.
I swore to myself that I was a shot and it's a little more, but it reminded me of something that is, if you do allow parking on both sides of the street, it's a narrow street, just remember that the fire trucks are processed too, they're passenger.
Yeah.
So if the road is not, you let a lot of parking on both sides. And I've got a road that's in my house, okay, the street where it's not long enough for a fire truck, but we do allow parking on both sides. So remember that.
I agree that fire trucks, garbage trucks, all the things that have to pass by. Again, we part of it's human behavior, right? How do you regulate behavior through design and all that? You know, there have been people certainly on our streets that when they first moved, I remember my street when people first moved in, or have guests that have never been in a neighborhood like this, they will double park. And inevitably, first thing in the morning, you hear the honk honk a school bus or a garbage truck and, you know, somebody's gotta run out and move, but that behavior self-corrects after some time. It's, you know, there's a lot of discomfort that is with living in an urban neighborhood that is close to a downtown, that people that are living out in Riverview and Lutz just don't have a different experience. That's the type of experience they choose to have here. That's part of the balance. But the way this is intended, and we can make sure that the language reflects that, is not that your space in front of your house belongs to you. It is not assigned to you. It's not only belonging to you. You can't get some of the code from that. It's that it goes basically into the pool of on-street spaces, just like it does now. But you've effectively had the incentive to preserve your curb space. That's sort of the carrot and stick approach here, that you're preserving it, counting it towards what you need, but it goes into the pool of everything on your street and the next street over, so that we are minimizing our curb cuts and keeping the on-street option.
I don't think I think the code right now is a 3-foot maximum fence.
Yeah, that's an error Ricky and I talked about.
And I
the other
think
day.
like the standard for a
It's an
flat
error,
rock
actually.
style is actually 4 foot.
It is.
Yeah.
We're,
Rather than, it's, okay, that's completely, and see through it, and
It's go around, you can see it before.
yeah,
we're sticking with that language. The way it got drafted and written slipped in, and when it got edited, it got edited correctly. So the way it's written in our form is not, it's gonna stick to that language. Yes,
on alleyways, like our alleyway is, you know, half of it successful, the other half is unsuccessful, like trees down it, can't drive down. So, and I don't even know who's responsible for it.
the homeowner that it's behind. So what the city did, and Frank probably knows more about this than I do. The way I understand it, from what the city did when they essentially, they still have the right of way there. You don't own it, but you have the responsibility to maintain it up to the center line of the house. But technically, you can call code enforcement on anybody that's got a down tree or overgrowth right now.
But if we really want to encourage alleyways, like, is that the viable structure, or does there need to be some sort of maintenance requirement coming from the city in terms of making alleyways always done? Especially if the house only has them on the back, no extra parking in front.
It's it's standard on the very top, so like kind of the middle of the block, if I would do mine rear entry, I'm gonna have to either go to my neighbors or pay for it myself to improve from the.
But then you're, the two neighbors on each end of the alley, it's all access, right? So they're not maintaining it, then what do you do?
So complicated.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
Once they talk to them, walk down, talk to them.
I do that now, there's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, to be honest, on my alley, for years, I was the only person that accessed it. And I'm 1, 2, 3, 4 properties in. I mow and clear to the end of the streets that I can get out.
Yeah. I don't know, I just feel like a lot of people would be nervous if I did it, because they'll look at their own alleyway and be like, I can't even drive that.
Yeah,
I don't know, I don't think that's.
until we can get the city to step up and take ownership more, to Frank's point, which is we need those agreements from the city.
Yeah,
And they're supportive of us doing this. A lot of this language was crafted by the planning department based on our input. You know, the folks that followed along just know that things evolved quite a bit from where it started to where it is. It kept the same kind of core intent. The language has evolved quite a bit. You know, they're behind it. I've specifically had discussions about them with alleys many times. You know, they've talked to the neighborhood association about alleys, because part of that does fall on the city. They still, in a lot of these alleys, have their sewer back there. There are active utilities. Now, the city has some obligation to maintain, improve that alley, deal with the drainage, deal with the utilities underneath it. And they've advocated that for a long time. So part of this is moving forward. We got to keep the pressure up on that issue. We're dealing with it on the 100 block of West Francis now, and getting them to do something about the storm. So
so right now, is the city responsible for the pavement, like maintaining that's the actual, or is that on the homeowner also?
on the homeowner, the city's not, they say that they're not responsible for any of the maintenance, except what's on the ground. The way I understand it, am I wrong, Frank? Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
I think you have to watch out for the people that have unofficially taken over the alley with their pets.
Speaking of that military, so
Yeah.
they put the fence around my alley behind my home, and I spoke with them, and they were very hostile. So they actually threatened to shoot me, so I had to contact police. File a report, and they take it up to the zoning committee. So the zoning committee was, they gave them 2 extensions, and then they made no changes. And then they said they're going to file for pursue litigation against my neighbor who removed the fence, so that I have access to maintain my own property, because it all came up to try to re-whack along my fence line, and they're very hostile. So it can be done, you just have to be persistent with it.
And then that's unfortunate that it comes to that, and again, I think that's part of, as we're going through a change in the neighborhood, again. Things are gonna change no matter what, new things are being built, you know, there's people that, you know. Totally got away with having jungles of yard time, and then now next to new developments, and, you know, there's a clash of old and new. But how do we help that transition, how do we guide that transition, you know, and part of that's gonna be, you know, working with the people that have been here a while, actually having the conversations. And sometimes they're hostile, and you gotta have somebody else intervene. But, you know, I mean, I think that's a part of being in Tampa Heights, you know, from Tampa Heights, living in Tampa Heights is, you know, we've got to get out there and talk with each other. You know, we do our best on the board to get out and, you know, put ourselves down there as best we can. And I think that's just different than the type of community where everybody, you know, just kind of has a deed restriction and just, you know, then ignores everything else. So things you had to go through that. And it sounds like you're persistent, you got the outcome you need. Yeah, and it stinks that it takes that much effort, but, you know, I mean, the bigger picture, this is the city we live in. This is how they choose to lead, this is how they choose to spend their budget. And as citizens, you know, we've either got to do it ourselves, or we've got to elect better people, or we've got to demand more of them. So, you know, I mean, I hate to use the city as a scapegoat, but I also think that it can limit us to just accepting the status quo. On many sides. On my soapbox, but, any other questions about the topic at hand?
It might also help us if there was a way to get the garage setback reduced with transportation department. They make it, it's 24-foot turning radius to get into a garage.
Yeah.
And I still think the
It makes sense.
and you can theoretically, if uncomfortably, you can do like 12 feet. The person has to back and forth 3 or 4 times.
The civil engineers I'm talking say 16 and comfortable.
You can do it, correct. But I think that would be a big help, because that would also encourage people to put their garages toward the back. And now with another, I mean, some of these alleys I've seen are narrow like 8 feet. You know, if you have an 8-foot alley, I think you have to build a 16-foot driveway in your rear to just put a garage, or you have to go through a transportation waiver, which no one wants to do, because transportation is very rigid. But I think that would be something, I don't know if they consider that reduction to that 16-foot, but I think that would be nice. The developers would appreciate that, because I think you see them more likely, because then they can still preserve a lot of your yard space on 100 of why not, or deep level.
Yeah, Matt, are you making some notes on that stuff? Perfect. No, that's a great point, because I've had a similar discussion. Frankly, I've had some discussions on some projects I've worked on in this section of the neighborhood. And because historic preservation, you know, has some influence, they're more likely to encourage that sort of reduction over here than they are anywhere else. I've seen them support that and intervene in transportation to support that. Okay. All good ideas. Thank you, Stephen. All right. Here's another big one. Commercial parking. So the core of this comes right out of that HART TOD study that I mentioned at the beginning. So again, HART funded a look at about 2/3 of the neighborhood related to the plan to extend the streetcar, as well as run bus rapid transit up through our Florida and Tampa Street corridors. So, on that, obviously, the streetcar, route has been decided, but there's not funding to do it for those that, haven't heard that. With the transportation tax now in serious limbo again, it doesn't look like the funding will be there for the streetcar. However, FDOT has funded dedicating a bus lane from Florida and Tampa Street, a car lane and turning into a bus only lane. And they're through Seminole Heights, and I think perhaps all the way up to USF, turning east on like Busher Fowler or something. But that direct dedicated transit connection is going to happen. It is funded, it is in the books, they're in the design stage now to handle all of the stormwater issues on that corridor, redo the sidewalks, crosswalks, and that dedicated bus lane. So we are going to, even whether it's in a baby step or a bigger leap, have a more transit-oriented commercial corridor throughout our neighborhood. Our main commercially zoned corridors are Columbus Drive, and then Tampa Street up until about just north of Columbus and Florida Avenue, all the way up. And so what Hart recommended through that TOD study was a drastic drop in parking minimums for commercial buildings. And so we have taken that on and have inserted it into this code. And here's why we think that's necessary is, think about the amount of development that's gone on downtown, the amount of development that's gone on in Seminole Heights above Florida Avenue with, again, some of those new buildings coming in, or at least the redevelopment of historic buildings that are on Florida Avenue. We've been skipped over for commercial development for the most part along that stretch. There's some existing commercial buildings and businesses that are there that are great, but there's still an insane amount of underutilized or vacant land or surface parking. So at least here, you can see on Columbus where we've mapped it out, and there in the Franklin Street District, everything in red is the surface parking lots or vacant land. And it's very hard to point to, what's going to change this. We've attempted to try to get this into a CRA to get tax increment funding possible to try to spur some of the development. That's almost a dead end for years in the city and county. But one thing we can do is drop the parking minimums required for businesses to come into some of these existing buildings. I've talked to a lot of businesses on Franklin Street, and again, our current parking code, determines what you're required for off-street parking based on your uses, whether you're a restaurant, you're based on a person count. Some businesses is based on a per employee count. Some businesses is based on a per square footage count, like for a doctor's office or a retail establishment. But they struggle to try to lease enough space to qualify for the on-street parking, where they have to do the whole waiver process. When there's ample amount of on-street parking, as well as under the interstate here, with FDOT lot that at least up until recently have only been for monthly pass holders and not for the general public. The downtown partnership did a parking inventory of this area. Was found that there's just, at least in our southern portion that they looked at, they didn't go as far north as the north end of our neighborhood, but there's just an excess essential parking. Yet we're not getting the development because businesses have to secure that, and it's expensive to lease it or to buy enough property to provide it for themselves. So one of the code mechanisms that we're looking at to incentivize more of that commercial development on corridors is for non-residential development, requiring one space for 2,500 square feet. That's a pretty drastic drop from where we are. And for structures under 1,500 square feet, be required to have 0 off-street parking spaces. So a prime example of that is Lee's Grocery Pizza Place has 0 off-street parking spaces, yet it thrives. It's one of the favorite pizza places in the whole city. It's a magnet for people. Some of the residents that live there, I remember, really bought it for the parking reason, but some of the people you can find from there every week. I mean, that's, again, from my personal belief, part of living in an urban neighborhood, is having those businesses accessible, walkable to you, and getting those in here by dropping the parking requirements. We believe that the key parts of that, again, the majority of this comes from the heart study. Some of the figures have been tweaked, but these concepts come direct from that study that was done. Franklin Street as well. Any site with less than 20,000 square feet is exempt from minimum off-street parking requirements. That's to spur on Franklin Street, like we were talking about, that has ample surface parking in its surrounding area that's within that 4 mile safe walking distance. Historic properties like Tampa Heights, any proposed change of use to a pre-World War II building can reduce the required off-street parking by 15%. And we're allowing the reduction of vehicle parking to trade 5 bike parking spaces per 1 car space. And that mirrors the same thing that is being implemented for there's a code of amendment going through for downtown. So that's the same language that comes from that. So something I guess I want to touch on before we get into just taking some more commentary. Part of where this whole code amendment comes from is not just, you know, the current administration of the board just pulling this out of thin air. You know, we firmly believe that we, as stewards of the neighborhood, have a directive to work on these things from our articles of incorporation through our 2003 community plan. These values that support these changes are part and parcel into there in terms of, you know, the civic associations. Articles of incorporation state that part of our duty is to you know, promote new housing development that is aesthetically compatible with storage new businesses here. I mean, that's all part of the motivation for this. Part of our vision is making that construction compatible with historic character. Is to provide for street parking. It is in our 2003 community plan, allow alleys for access, to design houses friendly to the street, to encourage development, preserving trees, reducing the impact of shaded areas. This has all been laid out over 20 years ago. And so that's really what's driving how we're trying to formulate this overlay. And it's littered throughout the Tampa Comprehensive Plan 2, named Tampa Heights, the pre-World War II urban village. You know, it's talking about language throughout here in support of exactly what we are trying to accomplish. It's you know, building orientation to the street, built to setback lines, facade articulation, the location of parking. It's, you know, to minimize the potential conflicts between pedestrians and motor vehicles. It's, you know, development projects in urban villages like Tampa Heights should be oriented and integrated in scale with the surrounding community. This one particularly, that single family and multifamily should be designed to include orientation of the front door to a neighborhood sidewalk or street that's direct from our comp plan. That where feasible, parking areas, garages, and carports should consider access from an alley. You know, and then single family attached housing may be considered if it can be demonstrated that they're integrated with single family detached residential. And so that's a part of as we densify what's guiding this, trying to take what has not been done, which was when this comp plan was passed, I think 2011, they never updated that 1986 zoning code. The city's going through another comp plan amendment now, they're rewriting the comp plan again. But unless these values get written into our land development code for the city of Tampa, nothing's going to change. Because every time something goes through development review and you point to the comp plan, it's too loose. It doesn't have the teeth because the teeth need to come into the land development code. So that's why putting it in overlay is the attempt to do that. So back to that last item about parking. Open it up for any questions and comments there too.
Bike parking, yes, firemen citywide pass,
No,
yes.
it did, okay, okay,
So can you strike that requirement
okay.
or that allowance?
What task on that?
Requiring bike park,
Okay,
not using it as an incentive.
okay. What's the requirement then?
It varies by
Okay,
by use, just like parking does.
okay.
But rather than treat it like a carrot, why not? If we are transit supported,
Yeah.
the design require something that's.
Okay. It was like Matt's name. We'll look at the,
With the parking reduction they already allowed, it's like, we really need another reduction, and that 50% reduction and bike parking reduction.
Is it
valid point.
include the areas around Armature Works, and we're all YMCA on property locations that are west of. For the.
Well, it does not include anything in the CRA.
CRA,
Not
right,
in the area.
starting from
CRA is there.
Pearl South, is the area for the height, but not,
Is the YMCA in the area?
Partially.
well,
No, not in the CRA. It's partially.
I would think that, because I know they have a master plan of building like 300,000 square foot office building.
Yep.
Which would theoretically require, significant amount of apartment space, usually anywhere from 3 to 6 per thousand.
And what we're seeing though is like things, with it coming in is that most of the time they're seeking parking reductions through waivers in the zoning anyways. Or somebody's gonna build the amount of parking because that's what the tenant wants and that's what the business requires. So they're gonna build at or above the parking minimum anyhow. So we're saying if we drop the minimums to allow small businesses to thrive, the big developers are gonna put in the amount they need. Every time I meet with a big developer or the ones I've worked with in the past, I mean, they're gonna put in the amount of parking that makes sense for their development, for their residents, for their businesses, for the office tenants they're trying to attract, trying to get oxygen here and, who have Pfizer. I mean, they're gonna come in and say, I need this much parking, period. For
Why leave that
Lease.
chance? Because if someone wants to construct parking, is usually one of the, it's very cost prohibitive. It's kind of the breaking point. If they're adding structured parking, it could kill a lot of deals. So if they're gonna do it, you're giving them a chance where they can maybe make a significant smaller structured parking and a lot more office, which is now flooding the streets potentially with a lot more vehicular traffic. So it's just why, if the goal, I guess, try to understand the goal. If they're already building this parking, why not make it meet the parking? If the goal is to try to convert the existing buildings and say that they might not have to be, that what they're accommodating otherwise not conforming, not make that.
so you could track the type of move by a certain developer to do that, so like if you look at retail, if you're looking for like small mom and pop, like local neighborhood things, right, where there's smaller shop. They are not gonna be able to afford any project that has that much parking. It's too much into the parking, the cost of the structure, but the rents don't make. I also think the way the layout are retail base versus like the shallower one, then you will not cost more. So you can do the underwriting requirements, you're gonna check. You're gonna get more of a larger industrial developer versus smaller retail.
But if you want, I can see what would be capped at a certain size, a certain maximum amount of spaces that are gonna be cut. And theoretically, on a 300,000 square foot office building, usually we get 1 per thousand, we get some, most of them are gonna be a thousand parking spaces, something crazy. So if we're saying according to this, you're almost reducing that by the.
1/3 per thousand.
You're talking about tier.
I
Like a
think
tier
we're
approach.
restructuring so that it's for small business and not for
Right.
related companies.
That can be considered. So again, here's sort of the example. This sort of practice in dropping parking minimums, again, has been done around the country so far. In Hartford, Connecticut, dropped all parking minimums from all developments, period. Buffalo dropped it for, all parking minimums for structures under 5,000 square feet to target smaller buildings and small businesses sort of in that way. I think Santa Monica did an entire drop. So there's different ways to approach it. Again, part of where we're not trying to recreate the wheel is HDR, which is an international planning and engineering company, came in and wrote that and did not put a cap on it. And when we sat and looked at it, said, well, again, based on some of the folks on our board that have been in discussion, knowing how larger developers and larger multifamily and larger commercial work, they're going to put in the amount of parking that their tenant, that the market demands that they put in, that they're not going to really shortchange themselves. They're going to do what they want to do anyways.
And they have the same lot, they can still go to Tampa Heights, like that area.
I think there's a kind of, for example, like having lived in kind of like, they, it's a great kind of grant, they went too far and then we literally cannot park in Santa Monica as a resident, which is not what we want for this. And so I think the point is like, if we're going, and then all of this things, we love where the big development stuff. So like, if you're going to build that big of a building, like, you should be able to park it. Whereas like with a mom pop, so we groceries with small restaurant or whatever it is, and small like doctor's office or wherever, like, we're using it for that. But I do think that like, there is a downside to what happens in Santa Monica where like, there's like almost needs to like, you really have to walk a mile to get to your house and find where to park. And I don't think we want that to happen. If you then allow, like, you're just like putting a lot of, like, the hope of someone who's gonna have to lay a lot of concrete. So, or not, right, you just always say, like, hey, you just not have to have on structured concrete, and like, now some are a lot like we expect.
That's a good point. I mean, it's good to have that perspective because that's why we're here talking about this, right? Is making sure that we get this right.
But
And that's got different perspectives in it.
Break more small businesses that are, like, whatever we can do that, and that's like super important, and then you have people in the neighborhood who then can create small businesses for the neighborhood, and it's like, to your point, like, enhances that overall community feeling, like people supporting people, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think it's encouraging what you want. So if the goal is to encourage small business type units, if the goal is to encourage maybe women-owned businesses or whatever the case may be, we'll reduce the parking requirements if you can have so many of your office spaces have this size, or so many retail stores on this size, whatever the case may be. And trying to back into the goal and then encouraging that behavior versus saying, we're gonna have Actigen, bunch of 40,000 square foot offices instead of providing 120 spaces per side, or now we're just gonna provide 50 spaces because we only need to. And now that it's a user cost like $10 million to sell the building, and let that be a future person's problem in terms of how the tenants are happy with parking, or now the neighborhood is upset because the person that works at Heights Union parking in historic Tampa Heights on the White Street. You know, so they're just, again, trying to encourage the neighborhood to be a bonus because there's affordable housing bonus. You want to provide affordable housing, we'll give you additional units. So it's like, if you want to do certain things, whether so much of your office space is affordable, we'll give you parking reductions or something to that effect. So it's trying to encourage the neighborhood to want to, you know, using the Heights Union and these places, we're charging $50 to $60 a square foot. It's not affordable for any small business to do a foot place doing that. So it's either a way to encourage and say, hey, look, 10% or 20% needs to be under a 20 or take up at a reasonable rent rate, and then it would be.
Yeah, I think we can work into that. Frank, I know you've been trying to.
People done their homework because, when this actually happens, what they're talking about is when you do a change of use.
Mhm.
You go from a dry cleaner to a restaurant lounge, and now you need all this parking space, but you don't have a place to put the car because you've already designated it as a dry cleaner. So that's what happened in City Heights. That's why it's going into the neighborhood there. Because a lot of those are the shops that are now these restaurants and lounges. They were originally mom and pop dry cleaners and little flower shops and things like that. Where you and like these grocery, it was my grandmother used to take me there for grocery shopping, and now it's a lounge or not a lounge, another spot. And now you got parking that is not adequate for it. But that's
So how do you envision then sort of crafting something that helps? Would you craft something that helps small business
I think that if you give too many waivers, which is what the city tends to do, they give waivers on top of waivers on top of waivers. And then when there's a change of use, we don't have a park. That's gonna be a problem in the future. If everybody takes part of these old commercial buildings and try to do something more grand. And then you're gonna drive a lot of properties and neighborhoods. So again, we gotta get strong commitments from the city, we gotta hold them to it, because they don't have a code, they don't have an working on that works very well.
You know, another example of it is also that is Pearl. Pearl has so much parking. And yet there's nobody on Ross because all the occupants of Pearl, the parking on the street. So then they make it into community parking, and shockingly now we've got that Ross is. So you had over too many parking spaces, they weren't being utilized at Pearl. And you couldn't park on the street because residents doing that. We changed the policy of the hourly parking, and suddenly now everything's back the way it should have been. So it's not necessarily a parking. See what I'm saying? Like they have more than enough parking spaces as well. That's just behavior that was driven by it. So there's also another side of it as well.
Yeah, that's not a Pearl example, because Pearl is actually a residential development, but it's when you take the small. It's commercial density, and they do have parking, yes, you got to think that's part of what we said, we have to help the city to their feet, they have to work with you. If they don't, you're gonna have nightmares because of the problems. The city's got to move on.
Right. There's about somewhere on there.
It is, but like I said, a lot of the problem comes when there's a change of use. Some of those little units in there probably have been designated for car parking spaces for 1,000. Because that's what residential usually, retail usually is for 1,000. So, you know, if they change it to something else, and now you don't have any parking, what do you do?
I think what we're saying is based on what's already been studied, we have a surplus of parking. Again, and that part of this discussion is taking, you know, what's been recommended and making sure through different people's perspectives and experience in the neighborhood, we're fine tuning this for what gets passed. And, you know, Franklin Street, for instance, again, within that, what quarter-mile walking distance that most planners define as a walkable distance. I mean, you've got hundreds and hundreds of spaces between all that's available on street that's, you know, striped on street, all the parking spaces under the freeway that are underutilized. And so it's really working with the city to utilize what's existing better that can also then help the businesses come in, but then not have to lease it because we've got the inventory. I mean, that was the Tampa Downtown Partnership's big conclusion, was that really, even at peak, the downtown and downtown periphery area is only using about 75% of the parking inventory it has. And so part of it's about behavior and working with the city about how we regulate that, use it. So again, the thing about this document, and I think everybody on the board will agree, is that this is not the cure-all. This really isn't. Again, this is how do we incrementally do it? I would love to have a robust cure-all document that has been written by scores of well-funded professionals that, you know, has fully, analyzed, every single portion, every street of our neighborhood. Every neighborhood in our city deserves that. Really is a customized district plan for how that neighborhood can best develop. But until the city really steps up and does that, that's part of why they put it on our plate. And we're trying to fulfill that as best we can with some sort of incremental approach while we continue asking for more. So think of things like, how do we use our parking better? How do we do code enforcement better? How do we take care of our utilities and our alleys better? I just don't know if we're going to sit around and wait for the city to do all these things, then nothing's going to happen. We gotta push leadership from below, I think.
Was the Harvard Team study published?
It was not.
Using it unpublished,
It was,
recommended?
well, I think it was published somewhere. It was recommended to the city, and the city is still sitting on it. I don't know. Is it?
So, referring to a document that is in release. That's a justification.
It's not necessarily the justification, I'm just saying where it comes from. The justification is understanding that there's
I guess referring to a document.
Service.
That's benefit, no one else.
I'll have to double check where it is online. I know I've.
I'm just-
Our boards, yeah, our boards looked at it, so.
Public meetings that we do out.
But was it work? This question.
But the report was made from the public meeting and the results.
I'll look for a firm answer to that.
You might want to choose, if you change the wording like proposed.
If it was, and the city's holding that block.
They're not trying to hold it back. Cities engage in all kinds of studies.
Yeah.
That just sit on they'll sit like, they'll engage, they'll have some money to do a small POD study or a urbanism study for an area. Or like, I just moved here from Gainesville, we have form-based code, and we're a little bit further along in the same process. And we did something pretty radical. We just eliminated single family zoning for the whole city. Because we got to the point in our town, when I lived at the Ludlow school there. I mean, if you're a young person, you're not gonna be able to buy a house with it. My parents, you know, I graduated college, bought a house like that. I mean, so housing costs were a reason to developers all the developers that came into our town. Want to build in those areas where people want to walk to places. And so we didn't allow anything like quad, or like other than the oldest historic district in Gainesville, we didn't allow any of the traditional garden apartments or any of that. But now we are, you know, we're through the process of using the form-based code to direct what the design will look like. Now, we are further along, we've had that for 5 to 7 years. But the cities, go back to the, sorry to talk so long, but the cities employ these studies all the time. They're not holding them back. It's just a lot of times the city, I see your city, we spend almost as much money on our roads as you guys have in this entire budget, and we're a town of about 200,000 people. Tampa is not ready for the amount of population that's coming here in the last 2 years. They're not. I talk to people in the city, they're not prepared for this onslaught. I mean, there's a lot of people moving here from other parts of the country who, the people that have lived in the city for like 20 to 30 years, they're just like, wow, there's a lot of population growth in a short period of time in the city. And I agree with you that you can't sit back and wait on the city. They're already behind the curve, to be honest, probably a good 10, 15 years. And I'm not criticizing the city. I'm just saying from the outset, if you sit back and wait for them to catch up, it could be a long time. It just could be. So, but those studies are not, the city's not trying to hide something from you. Those are done by very professional individuals who, you know, have a lot of good ideas, and they're not trying to hold something back. It's just, they're not gonna publish everything and put it out there. I mean, you can go access it, you go talk to I mean, I've gotten studies from all kinds of, you know, the planning office in my old town, and I mean, they're not trying to hide things, they're not like some kind of secret deal. So.
Yeah, I don't think reading comments is trying to hide it. I think
No, I understand.
is it publicly published?
And doesn't say,
You
and
don't want to
doesn't,
refer to something that is not.
doesn't, let's say, to my point, support these ideas
Right.
in this location.
Sure.
Yeah.
As one level, one way to put it.
So what's the process now, and now what's the timeline?
So the timeline now is November 7th for the planning commission hearing. So, we are gonna, you know, go back into the document, kind of process what's been collected tonight, and continue to evolve this. Again, this thing's, you know, we've been working on it for over 2 years. And every time we, you know, get some feedback, we incorporate that as best we can. We run that past the city. A lot of times we'll say, hey, this is a good idea from somebody, we're gonna run, and they'll go, nope. can't do that because it conflicts with this, and we just really don't want you to even touch that part of the code. So I think we'll take some of this, see how we can improve this based upon the great feedback we got, and then get the next version ready before the 7th. Redistribute that again. We keep updating our website. We keep it in every email that THCA sends out. So we'll update that with the latest document once we have it. Do the planning commission meeting. Again, in our monthly meetings here, we talk about it every time. We highlight the changes that have happened since the last time we talked about it. So October 27th is our next meeting. So that's next Thursday. Again, this is on the agenda every time. So if we're able to make some improvements, alterations, clarifications, then we'll talk about it there. The 7th, it goes to the planning commission. If it passes the planning commission, then it gets scheduled for city council. And so that potentially in December. And so then we'll probably host another one of these meetings before it goes to city council to make sure that the feedback we've taken has been incorporated, everyone understands what's going on. Goes to city council first reading based upon maybe people that come out of the woodwork that night, or whatever council feels at their pleasure, they may ask for certain changes to it. So between first reading, second reading, which are always a month different, then there could be some changes there too, from with their final thoughts.
And then this is acted as a standalone,
So it's an overlay district, so it blankets, so the underlying city code still exists, because the code is long and complex and governs all sorts of, land development. This is in addition to it, so it's sort of an extra layer that has to be reviewed when somebody goes.
But it's not attached to like the TOD or that.
Totally separate. And this isn't true form-based code because it's not defining, it's not changing, scale, heights, building shape. I mean, form-based code really, it wipes out, like Seminole Heights has no underlying code. It is their form-based code. They might still have transportation, some other things that apply, but it's a pretty robust standalone code that wiped away whatever was there before. This is just neighborhood specific.
Feedback on that? And the transportation department?
Every department's reviewed
And
this.
they said, they given you their indications, they'd be okay with that level of bargaining or bargaining.
Every department is legal, planning, transportation. Every time there's a revision, it gets circulated back through the.
So have you guys done a study on if the million plus square feet of office building that's proposed for this area, what that would potentially do in terms of potential cars that are on the street?
We don't really have the budgets commission study.
I mean, I was serious, but if we're talking about a million square feet of cars, or a million square feet of office buildings, sorry, that would have the typical 3,000 to 5,000 square feet of cars, and we're cutting that by 2.5. We're talking about thousands of cars that are now being.
So the conception that came from other cities that have implemented it, not as clear as we've done for the past. Obviously, we're involved in the board, we all have a job,
Cities in Florida though?
no.
Because I do think Florida is very unique. I mean, I've lived in heavily transportation oriented cities. Like Chicago, I didn't know a car, Austin, lots of people don't have cars, but, I guess it's relevant to be comparing it to a Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, because of a car-based city culture where this is a heavily 116-year-old, one car type of culture versus people in a lot of other parts of the world. So I would challenge the concept of making sure we're not comparing to the Northeast, Midwest, and maybe where this could work to now we're theoretically going to be flooding the streets. Like, it's just because of significant reduction, not because of the concept. It's a significant reduction with what is Tampa Heights getting in, right? Not, hey, look, if you're doing this, put millions of dollars into the school, put millions of dollars into the road, put millions of dollars to improve Tampa Heights. But no, I think new code, I can put that parking, I'll do it. Not, hey, look, I'm gonna get $20 million to improve the roads in this entire area. I'm gonna improve the sidewalk. I'm gonna improve, donate money to the local public school, put building in park. What are these, so what are they gonna do with the neighborhood? I'm gonna put the off building, build it, sell it. They're gonna make the money off of it. So I think that's the part that I was down, whenever we built here, you put tens of thousands of dollars per unit into impact fees that are then taken and put into other neighborhoods. When I'd like to see at least some segment of those fees go towards the neighborhood associations who allocate those in a manner that they think is best to the neighborhood, whether that's new sidewalks, new roads, improving galleries, new parks, new, like, budget for the schools, new supplies, we can give them like a football team, whatever the case may be. So that, there's a lot of good here, but I think the overall goals are good, but you need to force them to get these good goals, there needs to be forced development in terms of, you do this, we'll give you, versus just, you get that without anything.
I think that's a great point.
We have a hard to get that.
The other side of it too is, if you focus too much on where we currently are, if you ever hear the percent of that, well, that's support change here. I would, like, I paid, some of the units, one additional density, you pay the city 30,000. For every additional unit, so that goes to the city, that, so they can, if there's something that they can allocate out, they want, if there's something that can encourage, they can't, I want, you're over like this, you know, you have to talk to the community to encourage you that exact demand, whether it's the ADU, the, you know, the retail, whatever the case may be. I think it's just not targeted enough in the entire approach. The goal is right, but I don't know if it's gonna, I'm concerned that it's not gonna achieve that, and it's gonna be impossible to run around.
I don't know if we have first strict control through.
Yeah, I think the point you're making is very valid and taken, that how do we get more investment into the different parts of the neighborhood that are lacking, like sidewalks, right? The city goes, period, we're not building any sidewalks, we don't have the funds, don't even come ask us about it, right? Parks, you know, affordable housing, so the other infrastructure things that are off-site from larger development. Yeah, maybe this is an opportunity to do that. Maybe the city's gonna slap our hand and tell us, no, we can't, but perhaps parking reductions and other things can be put in. I think we can talk about how that, we're not gonna be able to control that money. Maybe there's a way to write it so that it has to be spent within the district by the city. I think at this point in the game, I don't know that that's gonna be able to be figured out within, because I don't know that that really occurs anywhere else besides CRAs.
Well, they have they have bonuses for certain parks. You provide so much affordable housing.
Yeah.
We'll give you more. You
Are
provide.
you gonna just, that's within
Provide
the.
affordable office. We'll provide you with these parks.
Yeah, I get that point, and I agree. I think we're gonna look into how that applies to bigger developments, when it's development centric, what's the incentive bonus trade-off structure. But just to your point about how something gets spent in the neighborhood, off-site of that specific development, that's where, I mean, I think it's a tree worth barking.
Yeah, that would be
The city, but I don't know that.
That's a separate conversation with the mayor about trying to get a segment of the impact fees allocated to communities to be able to spend that how well. I think it's related to the bonuses, you very much can say that you know, the requirement 3,000, we will agree to reduce that incrementally, the more affordable units you have, or the more affordable office space you have, or more affordable housing you have, whatever the goal is. Working towards that, the more retail centric stuff you have, or more office, whatever that case is.
Yeah.
You can clearly say, I want, you get retail space, we get you more reduction. Because then that's more shopping and walkability. Office space is not walkability. Office space is 3 or 4 people driving. But I think it's trying to more pointed towards that.
Any other questions? Yes, comments? Yes,
In the purpose and intent mentioned affordable, walkable, transit. Support,
yeah,
set of historic. Storage.
mhm.
Affordable, walkable, what?
Transit.
Support. Oh, yeah, that is the purpose. And that's what-
Yeah, that's been our whole purpose the whole time, yeah. So the thing about the historic component, that was all, again, not to point fingers, that was a city thing. Yeah,
I'm just trying to, like.
their rationale for,
This 5 years from now. Remember what we were doing, what we should do.
Okay. Anything else? Awesome. I think next step, again, gonna take mass notes, the board, we don't have another board meeting before the next general meeting next week, but I think we'll confer on these notes via email. We'll certainly pass them back to city planning and see what can stick and see how we can shape this into some revisions that make common sense and still meet our goals.
You can do it, you can get in five for commissions.
Yes. Yeah, I think we'll have a revised version before the planning commission.
Are they gonna be able to touch it one more time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all the point to, it doesn't seem like they're taking 15 years, whatever it is, to get the reform. So if it goes one more cycle to make it right. I don't think that's over.
No, I was.
But I
Just
think
change.
it's better.
Yeah, roughly.
Incorporate law.
Yeah. Yeah, and we try to work it in. That's, I think that's the other thing too, is like, there's a lot of good ideas and we've been working on this a long time, again, to try to, have this focus to make sure that maybe people that aren't attending our meetings or reading this, weigh in. And you guys have weighed in a couple times, Ricky's weighed in a couple, a lot of people in this room have already weighed in a little bit, but we could probably keep putting this off for years more. Is I think we got to take this core and kind of where we're at and the ideas in this room and move forward with what we can accomplish. Yes.
Several of us walk door to door.
Yes.
I will tell you, that generally speaking, there was not one resident that I spoke to in all of them, part of the unit, that opposed the concept that we have to control. No one.
Yeah.
All of the favor, of course, there was favor. Deep dive, like.
Right, the devil's in the details.
Right. There's no one that knows the role.
Yeah, and I'll note that as of today, our petition is 225 people have signed it in favor of this. And again, that petition is posted right adjacent to the full language. We try to get people to read the full thing and understand it. The summary's there. But I think we got to take this document and the feedback and craft the best thing that works for the neighborhood. And again, Lena, you and I have done this over the last couple of weeks, walked door to door. We have covered the entire neighborhood in information about this, and we keep doing so to the best of our ability. But we have not received any communication of any outright opposition to this in the year and a half that this has been out there. Not a single person has said, period, has emailed us, has come to a meeting and said they are completely against it. It's fine if some do. I'm just saying, nobody has so far. People have had critiques of it, opposition to some parts of it, but outright, nobody has said that this is a thing that should not be done. So
you guys are gonna look into whether the ADUs are supposed to be legal rentable units or just because that's. Do you know the answer to that, or is it
that's what we got to get clarification, because the intent on this is that they're rental.
correct? Okay. And I believe.
So if we need to reshape our language a little bit to make sure that the intent is clear, then we'll do that. No.
Yeah.
Because again, I think they're treating it in parallel with theirs, but again, part of keeping it in here, our motivation is hedging our chances that the city fails on what they're trying to do citywide, and we still get that provision, even if they fail in other neighborhoods.
Oh.
But we gotta get it right.
Right, I just want to make sure that maybe when we talk about opposition, but you're selling, you get an apartment rental units, when I do believe the current code is that's not illegal. It's not like you have two units, it's one unit with a accessory structure.
Yeah, we gotta make sure we're not pointing towards what the city plans to change in the code, but what is actually in the code or clarify what we're saying. All right, thank you.
If you could-